Salutations, everybody. Welcome to the Thursday night after hours live stream. Ask your favorite RCDD. That would be me. Your favorite questions. As you know, we got a special show lined up for tonight. We have a special guest. We'll talk about him in just a minute. But as you know, we always start off every show on Thursday night with, what are you drinking? What are you drinking? So Chuck, you can't tell what I'm drinking. I better show you. Chuck is drinking his Zevia, of course, his sugar-free, caffeine-free, looks like water, but tastes like Dr. Pepper drink. It's kind of cool. Keto lifestyle, got to keep it going, right? So George is drinking water, right? But make sure you put in the comment box what you are drinking. It's after hours, so adult beverages are allowed. I just don't drink them because I'm doing a broadcast. Might be a little bit more interesting if I did, though. But it's not. It's not. So there we go. So take a sip of my after hours drink so I don't get a wet throat. We got an interesting subject tonight. We're talking about cables, cable testing, cable testers, some bonding and grounding and stuff. We got a lot of good stuff. So make sure that you put your questions in the chat box. You put your questions in the chat box. We'll pick up. And we do have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. So we're going to make sure that we cover those first. That gives you time to go ahead and put in your questions. Now, the second thing that always happens every Thursday night after hours is our acronym challenge. So here comes the acronym challenge. You know me, I do the acronym challenge every weekday morning on LinkedIn. I put up the challenge, give you a potential couple of answers, and then people answer. And then on Saturday, I put up all the answers to the ones that were done during the week. So this one is FEXT, F-E-X-T, F-E-X-T. Kind of applies to what we are talking about today. What does the acronym FEXT stand for? I'll give you a second to answer that. And of course, I cannot do the acronym challenge without doing my public service announcement. Help control the acronym population. Please have your acronym spayed or neutered. We have enough of them. We don't need any more, right? So nobody's saying put an answer in the chat box yet. So we'll look at that. Some people are already starting to answer already, right? Far end crosstalk. Hey, maybe we'll ask our special guest, what is far end crosstalk? Let's see. Let's challenge him and see if he actually knows what it is. He better know it because he works for a testing company. So my guest tonight is Steve Cowles. Well, I got to move some in the center of the camera there. There we go. It's the first time I'm doing a guest on live, so.
Yeah, it makes a difference.
Steve Cowles, RCDD, NTS from AEM Test and Measurement. Steve, how you doing today, buddy?
Good, Chuck. Great. Thanks for having me on board.
Oh, my pleasure, man. I saw you and Lisa on Todd's show today. Good job, by the way.
Thank you.
I love the fact that you can put something in a database for the test, because it applies both the tester and the labeling machine all at once. As a project manager, I see that as a huge time saver. Huge time saver.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Was that your first time on doing any kind of a live stream?
Yeah, first time doing live stream. We've done several of our own webinars and things like that. But first time doing any of the live stream venues.
Okay. A lot of people don't realize live streams are similar, but they're a little different because there's this person named Murphy, and he shows up at every live stream. You probably heard of Murphy's Law.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what the audience doesn't know is literally about 5 minutes before Steve was going to hop on, a squirrel got zapped on a transformer outside my house and killed all the power in the house. And I was thinking, oh, there goes the show. There it goes. I'm done. It's cooked. But we were able to boot back up in time, and there we go. So are you ready for some test questions, Mr. Steve?
Sure.
All righty. So now, if the audience members in the chat box, if you know the answers as well, make sure that you shoot us an answer. The first question comes from Joey, and Joey says, "What does a cable certifier do?"
So, cable certifier is going to, we'll kind of back up a little bit. You're a technician. You're installing this cable. You know what you're doing. You do everything right. The cable and the connectors are manufactured right. You put all of that stuff into the job. You do your install. Everything is done perfectly. And then what the certifier does is it essentially looks at that complete system. And it's going to tell you if it's going to be able to carry the data, like it's expected to. And there's a whole battery of tests that are run through the entire frequency of whatever category you're testing for. Things like resistance, there's going to be crosstalk, near-end crosstalk, far-end crosstalk. All these things are measured, return loss, insertion loss, things like that through the entire frequency spectrum. And it's compared against the standards. And there is a certain allowable amount of each of these parameters. And if you exceed that allowable amount, it will fail. But as long as you're within the parameters, it's going to give you a pass. So it's really just verifying that after all of your install techniques, after your terminations and everything, that everything is still in perfect working order.
So what's the difference between certifying and qualifying? Because those terms are used interchangeably.
Good question. So qualifying is not really certification. So certification is going to look at the TIA 1152A document for a dual-ended test. You're going to be running this test from both ends, whether your tester uses a remote with LEDs on it or like ours where both ends have a screen on it. It's still doing that same bidirectional test. And you've got to meet all those parameters. Now, qualifiers, there's various levels of qualifiers. A qualifier could be something that's just going to give you a basic wire map with some TDR functionality built into it, give you distance to a fault, maybe run some, the wire map test. It's going to run maybe some of the RF stuff, but probably not very much of it. And that's kind of where the qualifiers reside. Whereas a certifier is doing that full standards-based test. Now, we actually have one we term a qualifier plus, the network service assistant. It's kind of a sister product to our Test Pro, and that actually it will do those RF spectrum. It'll do the full RF sweep, but it's doing it in a single direction rather than bidirectional like a certifier would. So that would not qualify as a certifier.
So if a contractor, because part of my audience is people who are just venturing out into business on their own, right? They've been installer for a few years and they think, that's pretty easy. I can do that as a business. And they learned a hard lesson that having your own business is a little harder than just pulling cable. And so they're going to have to go buy some kind of a tester for the company. And I'm not asking you to quote any prices, but so somebody brand new coming in, should they get a qualifier or should they get a certifier?
That depends on the type of work they're doing and what their clientele is requiring. So if their customer base is requiring testing based on the TIA standards, it's a certification, they're going to have a certifier. The big rule of thumb is you got to look at the scope of work. If you have a defined written scope of work that tells you have to do a certification test, then you have to have a certifier. You're not going to get by with a qualifier. People that are doing installations, small office, home office, small business installations, that the customers just want to know, will it work for my network? Is it going to run my 1 gig? Is it going to run my 10 gig? They can get by with a qualifier that maybe is still going to do some of those RF parameters or does some actual network testing to verify that you can get a 1 gig or a 5 gig or a 10 gig connection. They might not care about certification, but they want to know when they hook up their devices after that network is installed that everything works.
Yeah, I know my day job, because I'm not a full-time podcaster yet. My full-time job is a manufacturer for connectivity products. I don't say who it is, but and we do require certification tests for warranty. So if somebody wants a warranty, it's got to be a certification test. So I could certainly see a small veterinary office or something. They're not necessarily worried about the warranty. They just want to make sure that it works. It works.
Exactly. And that's another big part of that scope of work. You may not have an end user who's telling you, oh, I want it certified. But if there's a manufacturer warranty involved, it definitely has to be a certifier.
Right. Yeah, I tell people all the time, the standards are great. They're going to tell you that connectivity products will work within that particular per the standards. But most customers just want to know, is it going to work?
Yeah.
That's all they care about. They don't care about what the standard says. Does it work? When I plug it in, will I get the green light on the back of my computer?
Exactly.
Right? All right, so let's look at the next question. And actually, Muhammad is in the room today. I saw him in the chat box. He wants to know, how does changing the NVP value affect test results? Now, before we answer that question, can you just kind of touch base on what NVP is?
Absolutely. So NVP, nominal velocity of propagation, is what that acronym stands for. And you probably have had that acronym on one of your challenges. So what that is essentially boiled down, it's a speed limit of the cable. It's expressed as a percentage of the speed of light. And it will, based on that number, you can know how fast those electrons are going to go back and forth on that piece of copper. And so if you start adjusting that NVP, it's going to change the length measurement. That's the key measurement that we make, that the NVP affects. It's the length of the cable. So, back in the old days, before people were wise to it, if you had a cable that was a little too long, you could just bump that NVP value and get it to pass. And the end users didn't know any the wiser. But you can't do that now, because everything's right there on all the test results. It's not like it was when in the early days. I'm showing my age now, but back when we started doing this, 30 years ago plus, there was a lot of things that people could play around with. Not so much anymore. Everything is right there up front on the test reports. And if you don't use the correct NVP value, a wise end user or somebody who's reviewing your test documents, maybe the person who designed that scope of work, who wrote all that, is going to look at your test documents, go, wait a minute, your NVP is off here. You're going to have to rerun these tests. So
will changing the NVP, we know that it affects the length of the cable. Will that cause a cable to just, if it fails the length measurement, does that cause it, the whole certifier, to give you a whole fail for the whole entire test, or just for the length?
It will fail length, but the whole test is going to fail if the length fails. So any of the given parameters that are a requirement as part of that certification test, any single parameter that fails will cause the entire fail. Now, you will see when you run a test that you go into the test details and you'll see all the ones that are green with a green check and they've all passed. You'll see the one thing that failed, and if it's length, it's going to have a red X next to it for the length. And then you can actually go in and look at that length by pair.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about watching the NVP. So for a while, when my previous boss left, me and the other trainer, we were responsible for looking at all the test results for warranty applications. And I found, I kind of knew what technicians would do, because I come from the field. I know exactly what you're talking about. It just doesn't pass. So they go in, they bump that MVP just a tiny little bit. And so I've been looking at this, because I think your software does as well too. I got to download it and play with it. The other manufacturer I was using at the time, you can pull down a database. You can literally just go right down the column, 0.71, 0.71, 0.71, 0.71, 0.68. Hey, why'd you change that one cable to 0.68? Now, I already know why you did. I'm just looking to see how honest you're going to be with me.
Yeah, you can see all of that. So the customers and our software is free. So if you get if you have an end user who wants that actual test file instead of just a PDF, they can see all that information as well. They can drill down into all that. One of the things, because you bring up a good point about the software being able to look at the MVP. If you ran, say, 300 tests on a job and you get back to the office and you realize, oh, my MVP was wrong for all this. Again, I'll go back to the old days. We'd have to go back out and retest it. Now you've got, in the recertification functionality built into the software, you can actually go in and update the MVP value to what it's supposed to be, and then recertify it. And what it does is it will then, you'll see the length measurements will actually change. And then all of that will still be on the same report. So,
okay, hold on. Stop the train. Stop the train. I'm just a simple cable puller. Let me make sure I understand what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me that if I test a 250 cable project and my technician put in the wrong setting, the wrong NVP or the wrong cable setting, I don't have to send my guys back out there to retest that project?
Correct. And correct
What?
on both. So if you set the wrong test limit and you set the wrong NVP, either of those can be done and you can recertify it. Now, a key note about test limit, because then everybody's going to go, wait a minute, I could just recertify everything to Cat 6A. Well, yeah, back that truck up a little bit. If you say you're doing a mixed job, you got some Cat 6 and some 6A on there, and the technician's running through and he goes into the limits, he sets his cable to 6 from 6 to 6A, he sets his jack from 6 to 6A, but he forgets to update the test limit. And he leaves that at Cat 6, runs all those tests, gets back to the office. Now he's like, oh no, I got to go back and recertify anything. But you don't have to, because the test has already been run on the unit. We run the test all the way up through that 6A frequency anyway. So the data is already in the file. It's just a matter of applying the new limit against the data that's already there. Same thing with the MVP value. You change the MVP value, it's just going to adjust that length a little bit. So
it's just plugging in a new 0.65.
Right, or
into the formula.
Right, or in the case of the cable category, just a different limit. So now that's good news, bad news. If you got a run that wasn't good enough to pass that 6A, it doesn't matter if you tell it to recertify, it's not going to pass. It'll give you a fail. But as long as it was a good enough run, it will pass. It's because the test data is there. So it's not going to just give you a free pass and say, oh, I'm going to upgrade my tests. I ran them at 6, so they'd pass, and now I'm going to upgrade them to 6A so I can show everybody a pass. It doesn't work that way. It looks at the real data.
Gotcha. My mind just did a blank on me. It's just that's my ADD kicking in, right? Now, is this something that all testers do, or is it just the AEM that does this?
No, there are several other testers that will do a recertification process like that as well. Some of the competitors will do this. Yeah, it's something that I think it was long in coming for the field, because we've all been there where we've gone through something, and you're there at the job site 11:30, 12, 1 in the morning. You're finishing everything up because you're under a deadline, and it's easy to forget to do something like that, and especially when you got a mixed job with some 6 and 6A like that. Very easy. You forget to push a button here or there, and you get back to the shop the next day, and you're like, oh. So it's been long in coming, and I think it's most of the testers out there have,
and that happens. That absolutely happens. I mentioned there was about a year that I was reviewing test results for the company, and one of the contractors did exactly that. They'd set the test up incorrectly, and so I shot them an email, and I said, "Hey, we need to talk about your test results. They're set up incorrectly for what they were for the warranty they were applying for." And I'm like you, Steve. I'm juggling 15 things, and I just kind of forgot to follow up with them. And 3 weeks later, I get a whole brand new test file. They went back and retested everything, and I was like, I didn't tell you to retest the cable. I just wanted to have a conversation with you, But he went back out, and they went back and retested the cable. I don't remember how big the project was, but it wasn't a small project. It was probably in a couple hundred range, and that could have saved them a lot of money.
I had a contractor about a little over a year ago, called me, and they were in a panic. I swear I thought the guy was going to start crying on the phone. And he had 300 drops that they had tested as 6, and it was supposed to be tested as 6A. And he was asking for help. And I said, well, I got some good news for you. So he was pretty happy, because he thought they were going to have to go back and lose their shirt retesting everything.
Yeah, because I was an estimator for many years, and when you estimate a project, you only estimate testing that cable once.
Yeah.
Not twice, once.
Right.
So when you're going back out there, that's being charged directly to the project.
Time is money.
Exactly right. So let's see what the next question is. So this one is from Mark. Mark is in their chat room tonight as well. He is one of our regulars. He was actually even on a guest on the show. How would you certify gap shielded cabling?
So when I first read this, I was thinking it was something other than what it is. So I'll cover both things that I thought. So one thing I initially thought was, sometimes when people talk about braided shielding, sometimes if you flex the cable incorrectly, it creates an opening in that shield coverage, if you will. Or if you have a cable where some of the shield's been compromised, but you still have some continuity, those, you would test it. It would still show good because it has shield continuity, but we have something built in that it's a shield TDR, shield locator, we call it. And it will find those discontinuities in the shield, so you can actually pinpoint them on a TDR trace. But then the more I thought about this question, I think they're talking about the type of shielded cable where there's an intermittent gap literally in the shielding. And it's by design. And there's a couple companies out there that have played around with this. And so with no real shield continuity from end to end, you're going to have to test that as an unshielded cable. It's the only way you can test it, because there is no shield continuity. Now, that being said, there are some considerations when you've got some gaps in the shield like that. You want to think about how well is it going to perform for the higher speed, the multi-gig speeds on the network. So in my experience, in addition to running that unshielded certification test, I would recommend doing what we have on ours. We have a multi-gig SNR test. So what it does is it puts traffic load on the link, connected to a switch at the other end, or you can do it with the other tester on the other end. And if you've got a system already installed with PoE and everything else, it'll draw PoE load at the same time and run a loaded test and give you your SNR value, signal to noise ratio, for the 2.5, 5 gig, and 10 gig speeds. So you'll determine first you can connect at those speeds, but also what's your SNR value? What is that signal to noise ratio? Because if you have an SNR that's dropping down close to 0, I'd really say anything under a 3, then it might be that you're getting some noise ingress because of the gap in the shield. But my understanding is that these manufacturers have designed those cables with a lot of research involved, and they've designed them so they can actually, even though there's a gap, it's still not providing a path for the EMI and RFI to get to the cable. So when you think about EMI, you have a source of the EMI, and then you have a path, and then you have essentially the receptor. Where's that noise going to go? So if you think about it, that path is blocked by a shield. And my understanding, and I don't have a lot of experience, maybe you do, on these gap shielded cables, but my understanding is they were designed so that even though there is a slight gap in that shield, they do provide enough coverage where it does keep that RFI and EMI from ingressing into the pairs.
Absolutely correct. The company I work for, my day job, we have what we call a discontinuous isolation wrap. And I don't remember, I think it goes 3 feet, and then there's a tiny little break, and then there's another 3-foot piece, and then a tiny little break. It does that over and over and over again. And it's technically classified as an unshielded cable. So you're going to want to do an unshielded cable test, because if you hit the nail on the head, if you try to shoot continuity down that shield, you ain't going to get it. And with the discontinuous isolation wrap, ours, and I think some of our competitors, another thing that it does not have is it doesn't have that drain wire. It's just that wrap, and it's kind of it's an in between shielded cable and unshielded cable, and you see it used a lot for signal extension products, HDMI signal extension, because they want you to use shielded cable. But the problem with using shielded cable, it costs money. And same thing with the shielded jacks, and then the testing, and it's really expensive. So it's kind of a go between the two. So if it is a discontinuous isolation wrap, a regular unshielded certification test will nail it out and take care of you. So yeah, very cool. All right, let's go to the next question. What are some proper and realistic ground test procedures?
So right out of the gate, so ground testing technically isn't part of certification. So it's not really something you see done in your certifiers. I know a bit about ground testing, more familiar with the outside plant part of it, where you've got, first off, the building ground outside. You got to have less than 25 ohms on that ground rod. That can be done with a ground clamp resistance meter, or it could be done with fault potential test. But you have to measure that. Now, beyond that, you've got to make sure you've got continuity from the shielding at your racks and panels and equipment to the bonding in the building, and then on out to the actual ground itself. So that would require multimeter doing resistance testing, unless you've got some other tool that I don't know about.
I do.
Chuck, that actually would be able to do that.
I've got experience doing this. So you have to use an earth ground resistance tester, right? And it's very specific. It does a couple things for you, right? So there's two types of tests. You have a 3-prong tester and a 4-prong tester. So the 3-prong tester is for testing existing grounds. The 4-prong is for what's called prospecting. So prospecting, what you do is you're measuring the ground resistivity, and the ground resistivity is based on lots of things. There's electrolytes in the ground. I've learned this from being a farmer here in Central Florida. There's electrolytes in the ground. Inside that, you have minerals and salts and all kinds of different stuff. And depending on the composition of the electrolyte will mean it's better at continuity to the ground than it may not be. So different types of grounds have different types of things. So you put these 4 prongs in at a straight line, at equal distances. Now the first one and the fourth one, those are called electric ground rods, electrodes. They're the ones that have the energy. And then the two in the middle actually do the measurement. And then it's called the Werner method. And what you can do is you can actually measure the resistivity of the earth and then find out if I put my rod in right here, will I get my ohms that the code book called? Because the number you called out for is actually right from the code book. But some manufacturers will require even a better setting, you 10 ohms or 5 ohms, and you got to measure to that. And the code book is really weird with this because it says that when you measure, it's got to be 25 ohms of resistance or less, but it doesn't tell you how to fix it. And it doesn't tell you, it also, well, actually it does. It says you could drive a second rod within 6 feet of it, but it doesn't tell you have to go back and retest it. So you may be within the same shells of influence, you may not be. So that just kind of shows you code doesn't care about performance; it cares about safety. So
right.
Oh, we got a specific AEM question. All right, hold on. Let me clear this banner real quick, and so you can. I'm pretty sure you're going to want to answer this question. I don't know if you saw it in the chat box.
I missed it.
And let me see. Let me find it again. Boom! There we go. Mike wants to know: is it possible to control the remote with the AEM tester?
Possible to control the remote. So, not really getting what he means by controlling the remote, but I can explain how the main and the remote works. So you can control the test. You can run the test from the remote unit. You can run the test from the main unit. When you run a test, you can see all of the same information on both ends. So when you run an auto test, if it fails, both technicians on each end of the link can pull the exact same details down. It will be relative to whichever end they're on. So if anything is like a TDR trace for the return loss or RL locator or our next locator, it will show you the distance to the event causing the failure from whichever part of the cable you're on, from the main or remote end. All the test saving is done, of course, on the main end, but you can control the start of the test. You can initiate the test from either end. So I hope that answers the question that was being asked.
Very cool. Now here's another question. You may not want to necessarily answer this one, but maybe you can say why. So David wants to know what companies rent Fluke network testers. Why would you want to rent a Fluke? We got AEM online. Rent one of theirs, right? Now, so are there companies that purchase your testers for renting?
I believe we've got some companies out there. We can kind of, if you want to send me some information, you can certainly email me or ping me, through LinkedIn, through this chat. I can get my boss, Lisa, to talk about who might be able to rent that equipment. I know there are some distributors who have their own, they have like a lease program. So that may be a method as well. It wouldn't necessarily be like a rental. They might do a lease. So if you're looking to get a tester but don't want to, spend the big bucks, maybe so. But because that question was specific to one of the competitors, I could tell you, you could rent that several times and easily buy one of ours. So
it's not cheap. It is not cheap to rent testers.
It's not, no. Yeah. And certainly you could get one of ours for a fraction of that cost. Yeah. So. And
I think it's the advantage. I remember because the company I worked for, the last installation company I worked for, we had several of those Fluke testers, and I could never get a hold of one when I needed one. And if you rent one, it's going to cost you, if you rent for a week, if I remember right, it was like $1,500 or $1,200 for a week.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take very long renting.
Well, if you think about it, the companies that rent this type of equipment out, there's a lot to be considered, and there's a reason why they charge so much. First off, equipment is not cheap, but secondly, every time it comes back in, they've got to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that everything is in perfect working order before they rent it out to somebody else, especially when you're talking about a certifier, because that will, that could, sorry about that. I got an alarm.
It's okay. My watch went up the same time yours did.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that equipment's very sensitive. And when you're talking about a certifier, time is money. So if they take that thing back in and they didn't go through it with a fine tooth comb and something got hosed up on it when it was out on the last job, the next person's going to pay for that in the time it costs them on the job site, not being able to do their testing properly. So for that reason, those rentals are going to be a pretty high cost, because those rental companies need to recoup that time they have to take and do that.
And you're taking a chance, like you said, if it could have gotten dropped, something could happen shipping.
You never
All
know.
kinds of stuff. Yeah. Oh, those names just popped in my head. Shows you how my OCD brain works. We're talking about the grounding. They're called current electrodes. The first one and the fourth one is called current electrode, and the two in the middle are called potential electrodes.
Yeah.
My brain thinks weird. Oh, Mike's got a follow up to that question. Whoops. I'm going back to the wrong one. There we go. Mostly interested if it's possible to VNC into the tester, remotely view the screen from the phone or PC.
Okay. So the only VNC functionality we have on the tester is is what I would do for demo purposes. So like I've done WebExes where we VNC through a USB cable into the tester, but for remote, if you're talking like Chuck being over near Tampa and me being here in Orlando and him being able to VNC into my tester, no, that you don't have that capability to remote into the tester.
Okay, very cool. And let's see what David says. Oh, love the Maryland flag. Well, I'm from Maryland originally. I'm a PG County boy. So there you go.
I went to high school next door in Arundel County.
Yeah. So we were close, but we weren't competitors against each other.
No, we weren't rivals.
No. Like I said, if you were from Parkdale, you wouldn't be on the show. I wouldn't even let you anywhere near my show.
Yeah, or if you were from Glen Burnie or Arundel, right?
Exactly. All righty, so here's another question. So why will my tester give me a past test result even though it might be slightly over 295?
That's a very good question. So the standards are written to allow a certain amount of tolerance. So there's like a 10% tolerance in there when it comes to that length measurement, and that's to allow for the accuracy of field test equipment. So you could, for a 90-meter run, you could see 99 meters before it starts to fail. For 100, and that would be your channel, or your link rather. So for 100-meter channel, you could see 110 meters before it would fail. So there is there's a slop factor, if you will, in there, and that's built in to accommodate the accuracy of the testers.
Gotcha. Very cool. So the last question, I didn't have enough time to put this one in on a nice little graphic because I was talking to a peer of mine today, a guy that I went through my Bixie T3 class with. For those who don't know what T3 means, that means that's the 2-week Bixie class to learn how to become a certified trainer. The roughest 2 weeks of my entire life, because the first week they teach you not just one class, they teach you the Bixie class, the installer class, and at my time it was the apprentice class, all in the same week. And that's 120 hours of curriculum if you were counting it. And then the second week, you got to teach it back to the instructors, and they weren't kind. They were not kind. So he called me today about something totally unrelated, and I told him about the show, and I told you I was going to have you on. And he asked me to ask you this question about fiber optic loss budgets. All right, so fiber optic loss budgets, I tell people all the time, it's like a checking account. If you deposit $100 in your checking account, you better not go spend $110 with your ATM card. Fiber optic loss budgets are very similar, except for instead of money, we're talking about signal strength. So his question was specifically to mechanical connectors, the kind that where the connector already has a piece in it from the factory. It's polished at the factory. You strip and you cleave another fiber, you stick it in the back, and you make them together. And there's usually index matching gel inside of there and stuff. So it's really nothing but a splice inside each one of those connectors, right? So as far as the fiber optic loss budget is concerned, do you have to account for that?
Yes. Yeah, it's a splice. It's a mechanical splice. So you need to account for that. And the testers have the ability to accommodate that. When you go in and set your test limits, you choose the limit that you're going to use, and then it's going to automatically calculate based on the length measurement of the fiber, how much loss you're allowed for that length of fiber. It's going to account for the loss per mated pair on each end of the fiber. Then there's a category for additional connectors. So let's say you have an interconnect halfway through. You've got really 2 links of fiber, and you've got some kind of interconnect in the middle. You've got to account for those connectors. And then there's splices. And when you put in the number of splices, let's say you've got a splice on each end for your mechanical connectors. You put 2 in there for your 2 splices, and it's going to give you 0.3 per splice per the standards. So you would have mechanical. You would have to account for that. Now, when it comes to mechanical splice connectors, versus fusion connectors, hands down, fusion is going to be the way to go. If since we're on the subject, you think about it. When you do a mechanical splice, from the end face of one connector on one end of the link to the end face of the other connector on the other end of the link, you have 3 pieces of glass. So now you've got multiple points for reflection that are going to cause loss along that link. With a fusion splice, once you've done a fusion splice, essentially, even though it's technically a splice, you've got one piece of glass from end to end.
Very cool. Yep, I agree 100%. Fusion splice is the way to go, and it's pretty easy. A lot of people are shy away from fusion splicing, but a Bixie event or Bixie conference about 3 years ago, I went to it, and so did the trainer. My other trainer who works for us, he has AV experience. He doesn't have cable dog experience, and he'd never fusion spliced anything before. So of course, I don't happen to have a fusion splicer sitting in my back pocket. So we went down to the event hall, found one of the vendors. I said, "Show my buddy how to fusion splice a fiber." And literally within a few minutes, he was fusion splicing 0.00, 0.01. An AV guy who's never touched fiber in his life. So it's a pretty simple, pretty easy process.
It's come a long way. Fiber in general, it's come a long way since I put my first fiber connector on in 1990. And things have come a long way. And back in the 90s, the fusion splicers we had back then were very different from what we've got now. Not as compact, not as good at doing the splice. Now I've seen some of these guys get like 0.01 on a fusion splice. So they've really come a long way with that technology, and it's definitely the way to go. If you haven't moved that way, I'd encourage everybody to consider. It's an investment, just like test equipment. Fusion splicer's not cheap, but it pays back dividends in troubleshooting. And mechanical splice connectors, sometimes you don't get it right the first time. You got to go back and redo it, because it's fail and test. So I'd encourage people to look at fusion.
We concur. And I don't want to show my age here, but the first fiber optic connector that I terminated on, the machine was about 18 inches wide, 12 inches long. It looked almost like a dual record player. It had these platters on it. And you had to put the fiber optic connector in that platter, and it had to polish that connector 5 minutes on each one of those platters.
Yeah. Did you ever do the hand polish, the figure eights?
Oh yeah, still do them. I used to teach. I taught them in class up to about a year ago or so.
Yeah.
So, one more question for you. You ready for one more? This is the new one that came in from Mark. How does your calibration process work?
So, calibration process, the standards recommend you calibrate on an annual basis. So, our testers will come with the calibration certificate out of the factory. It's good for 12 months from the date you purchase. So even if it was calibrated a month before you got it, when you purchase it is when your 12-month period starts. At the end of that 12-month period, what's going to happen is the tester is going to remind you it's time to get your unit calibrated. It can go to one of two facilities. We do it at our headquarters in Arizona, which is in the Phoenix area. And then I also do them here at my office in Florida. So it generally takes a day or two to turn it around. So, however long it takes to get to us, day or two to turn it around, and however long it takes to get back to you, it's pretty quick. It's not a painful process at all.
One more question came in as you were explaining that. And I normally would just cut it off, but this guy's a regular. He's a regular on YouTube, and he's a regular here. So let's go ahead and pop his question in real quick. It's 13 Serpents, and he wants to know, can you explain the difference of channel versus patch cord adapter heads? And can't they just update the test parameters of the channel to accurate next return loss, etc.?
Good question. So the answer is I'll answer the second part of it first. So there's differences in the circuitry of the channel and channel and patch cord adapters. So it's a little more complicated than just adapting the software inside the tester to accommodate that. But the difference between the two, the channel adapter is designed to test just that channel. So it's going to include your patch cords and the entire channel. The patch cord adapters are specifically set, and they're much tighter tolerances to test those patch cords because they're an important part of the link. So I'm going to digress just a little bit if we have a couple minutes here.
Sure.
And the reason that this question comes up probably is MPTL testing. So, and for those that don't know, that's modular plug terminated link. And the standards specify that you will use a patch cord adapter of the specific cable that you're testing. So if it's Cat 6A, you got to have a 6A. If it's a 5E, you got to have a 5E patch cord adapter on the modular plug terminated end. And then back in the closet, you're going to have a permanent link. So you're doing a permanent link connect adapter on one end and the patch cord on the other. And that's how you run the test. Now, that being said, I've seen a lot of people in the field who just use the channel adapters and run this test as a permanent link, and they have a channel on the other end. But that's going to show up in your test reports. You'll see it's going to show you what adapter you use. So if you have a savvy customer who's looking at that, they're going to go, hey, wait a minute, you didn't use a patch cord adapter. The other thing, there's a company out there or a couple companies probably that make things called field plug test adapters. Essentially, it's a 2-meter cord, and it's got an RJ45 plug on one end and an RJ45 jack on the other end. And you can plug that into your channel adapter and then run it as a permanent link rather than an MPTL test. It essentially turns your channel adapter into a permanent link adapter with a jack at the end of the cord instead of a plug at the end of the cord. So there's different ways to get around that. And I think the reason the question comes up is because patch cord adapters are not inexpensive. They cost more than the channel adapters because of the design of the adapter. And if you're only ever doing 6A, then all you got to get is 6A. But a lot of times you're going to have to test some 5E. You're going to have to test some 6. So now you're looking at buying 3 different sets of patch cord adapters, and it can get expensive. And that's why that question comes up. Patch cords too are a very important part of your overall link, especially if you're running PoE. If you've got a bad patch cord, it can bring the PoE down. The rest of your link might all be perfect, but when you put that patch cord into the channel, if it's a lower grade patch cord, you're going to have an issue.
And it kind of boils back to what we talked about in the very, very beginning of the show. Are you looking just to make sure that it works, or are you looking for certification?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. And if you're looking for certification, most of the manufacturers are going to tell you have to use a permanent link adapter on one side and then the patch cord adapter on the other side, because the measurement actually on the permanent link adapter, correct me if I'm wrong, the measurement on the permanent link adapter, I have a patch cord somewhere sitting on my desk. It starts at the very beginning of that mod end connector, where the channel adapter starts on the other side of that connector. Correct,
because you need to measure that connection. You have to measure that connector point in the channel. Yep.
Steve, you're a wealth of knowledge.
Well,
I appreciate you.
I think you got a little bit more than me, Chuck. So.
But see, here's what I tell everybody all the time. I do have 40 years of experience, but there's a lot to our industry, and I don't know the specifics about some things, and that's why I appreciate that you when I reached out to you, you said you'd come on the show. I was like, yes.
Well, I like doing these kind of things too, because even if I'm answering questions, I'm learning whenever I do things. Like I used to teach a lot of classes and train people on products, and I would always learn. Every time I do a training, I learn something. So I look at things like this as not just an opportunity to impart what I know and share my knowledge with people, but to learn from others that might be in attendance.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you having you on, and I might have to have you on again as a follow-up. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of questions after, because I'm looking at the comments. The majority of the comments are coming from YouTube, not from LinkedIn. So I'm pretty sure, because I do this across 3 platforms, so I'm pretty sure I'll get questions even afterwards. So we'll have to have you back on.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, I appreciate you. Thank you, Steve.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed that. And if you like this format of this show, make sure you let me know in the comment section or shoot me an email, and we'll do other interview content like this on the after hours too. Because like I said, no man can know everything about this industry. So until next time, everybody, be safe.